Hello everyone, this is Sakurai. This is probably your first time seeing my face because normally I'm just playing video games and posting them on here. But I do want to talk about something different today because for those of you who don't know me in real life, I do like to play D&D. I hope to play it someday. But generally speaking, I do like it, and I actually just recently bought the new Dungeons & Dragons 2024 Player's Handbook. And like anyone on the internet, I have an opinion, and I'm going to share it with you. Uh, Overall, getting into it, I think there's a lot of good in this book. They do make a lot of needed changes. I do like a lot of what they do. They update a lot of classes and subclasses that desperately needed updates, usually because they either weren't that great to begin with or they kind of weren't performing as they needed to. Uh, I'm not going to get too into detail because I'm not a professional YouTuber. I can't do any of like the fancy displays there. I'm not that good. But I do just want to share my thoughts on it. To start with, I think one of the good things and one of the pitfalls that this book does is sometimes it's really good about highlighting, hey, here's how the backwards compatibility works. And other times it's kind of like a blink and you miss it type thing. So, for example, if you go onto page 38, it says backgrounds and species from older books. Backgrounds in older D&D books don't include ability score adjustments. If you're using a background from an older book, just adjust your ability scores by increasing one score by 2 and a different score by 1, or increase 3 scores by 1. None of these increases can raise the score above 20. Similarly, species in older books include special ability score increases. If you are using species from an older book, ignore those increases and use only ones given by your background. Also, if the background you choose doesn't provide a feat, you gain an origin feat of your choice. And this is all right here in a nice little brown text box that it sticks out very well, and that's good. That's how I feel some of this other stuff should have been. And we'll get into the whole ability scores and backgrounds later because I do have some thoughts on that. But then if you were to go over to the cleric subclass, it really is kind of a blink and you miss it. And I actually had to, I made a comment on one of the Dungeon Dudes videos because it was about the new cleric. And I completely and absolutely missed what it says to do for backwards compatibility. Thankfully, another user on YouTube pointed me out to again, it is a blink and you miss it sentence, which, thank you for telling me if you're out there. But it's right here, level 3 cleric subclass. It gives you the usual fare, cleric subclass of your choice, life, light, trickery, and more. But then also is like the very last sentence. For the rest of your career, you gain each of your subclasses features that are that of your cleric level or lower. Again, and this one, it's right here, doesn't have its own text box. And again, it's really easy to miss. Like if you didn't even know you wanted to play a cleric and you're looking like through some of the things, this just seems like the same thing that they say on every other single subclass, even the ones that still start at level 3. So I think that's something to where they should have put that in its own text box and maybe made it a little more clear. So basically what you're going to do is if you want to make a cleric, you're going to use the cleric class from this book. And then when you go to choose your subclass at level 3 in accordance with the rules of this book, you then gain the things from your subclass from the old subclass. So if you were to make a Twilight Cleric, for example, you would go, you make a regular cleric, level 3, you become a Twilight Cleric. Anything on the Twilight Cleric that says level 2, level 1, level 3, you gain it then at level 3. Which makes sense. It makes sense to do it that way. I just kind of wish they made it a little more obvious because, again, I completely missed this because, you read through so many of these classes, it's kind of the same pair. It's like, okay, we know, I know Channel Divinity. I know, they changed Channel Divinity a little bit, but it's still there. It just takes a slightly different form. Ability score improvements, standard fare for any class at level 4, pretty much. So I kind of wish they had highlighted that a little more. But it's there, so you just kind of have to read the fine print. Uh, Next up, I'm going to go into backgrounds and ability scores. Because here's where I think the big misstep of this book is. Again, overall good book. This is like this is going to be like that Frieza meme of I'm going to ignore that, because the way this works is you have your backgrounds. So like for this example, you have Acolyte, and you have ability scores of intelligence, wisdom, charisma. So you can either put 1 point in all of those, or 2 points in one and 1 point in another. And I gotta be honest, I'm not a fan of this. And I'm not a fan of this for the same reason I'm not a fan of the old player's handbook tying those to races. And it's because, okay, well, what does it mean to be an acolyte? Okay, it's like a religious thing, but, not all, especially in D&D, when you have this multiple pantheons, almost all of them polytheistic, it's like, well, what is it? Being an acolyte doesn't really seem like it's necessarily a religious thing to do for all religions. Like, a good example is in Baldur's Gate 3, you have Shadowheart, and you get to learn like a little bit of what they do, and like, sure, I could definitely see, wisdom, intelligence, and charisma being in there, but there's also like a lot of militant stuff in there. Same thing, like me, I love my orcs. So it's like, okay, like if I'm gonna be a war cleric of grunge, like to me, like being an acolyte in that kind of religion seems like it would be a vastly different topic. Like I feel like they would definitely be up on the strength. But that's just me. Uh, and at the same time, it's like for some of these, it's like you could also make the case for other things, like where is it here? Sailor. Oh, yeah, here we go, Sailor. So strength, dexterity, and wisdom. It's like, okay, makes sense. Like, you need strength to, raise a sail. You need to be dexterous and do the physical labor. Wisdom, I can kind of see. Like, you got to be able to look out and be like, oh, yeah, I got a bad feeling about those clouds. There might be a storm coming. Sure, that all makes sense. But at the same time, if you're like a merchant ship, maybe you have charisma. Maybe if you're a ship that like, you also have to like map by stars and stuff. That's a case to be made for intelligence. So who's to say that you can't be a smart sailor? I think what they honestly should have done is they should have just made the ability scores a separate thing. That's just something you do. Pick your ability scores, or even if they wanted to say, hey, adjust either adjust the point buy or adjust the standard array to where instead of like your highest stats being 15, 14, you have to do 17 and a 15 for the standard array, or alter the point buy to account for more points. Or say like, hey, this is point buy. This is point buy. Add 3 points to wherever you want 2 stats. Yeah, simple as that. The other reason why I also am not fond of this is because if we do rules as written with this, some classes come out vastly ahead. Case in point, the Barbarian. In the Barbarian, in the old Player's Handbook Barbarian, you have, it says, strength is going to be your primary stat. Makes sense because, you're big, angry, and you smash stuff. And then Constitution next, which makes sense because you're not really going to have heavy armor, so you're not going to be like the Paladin where you don't have to rely on dexterity. But the Barbarians also have that unarmored defense where they add their Constitution and their dexterity to their AC. And so that gives them the bonus on that. So if we were to go rules as written and we want to make a Barbarian, there's only 2 backgrounds that give us both strength and constitution: the soldier and the farmer. And to me, that is lame. That is lame where if you want to make a barbarian that is like optimal, which, let's face it, some people are min-maxers, and that's fine. People play different ways, and you shouldn't have to make a min-max character. But if I want to make a min-max character and I want to go rules as written, those are my options. I can either be a soldier or I can be a farmer. What if I want to be a pirate? Because in the old player's handbook they had, hey, here's a pirate variant, and that's great. Like, yeah, sure, let me be a sailor where I have a good constitution, I'm strong, and I'm just basically the barbarian pirate, and I just go around plundering and pillaging. Yeah, so it's one of those things where to me it really limits the options if you go rules as written. So for me, that is going to be a case of when it comes to my players and my table, then if they make a character, I'm going to say, you know what, ignore the ability scores, put them in whatever you want, and that's going to be the end of it. And even the feats too, like for example, with Sailor, you get Tavern Brawler, and you know what, I can guarantee you, there's people out there that want to make the punchy barbarian with the Tavern Brawler backfeed. And let's see here, the options. And again, if you want to maximize your barbarian, so if we go rules as written, soldier gets savage attacker, and then the farmer, if these pages turn for me, come on, and the farmer gets the tough, which those are good for a barbarian, they're respectable. But if you want to make the punchy barbarian, you want the tavern brawler. So I mean, to me that just seems like you're bottlenecking your players into a very cookie cutter way of doing things. It's like you have to do things this way, or like if you want this feat, you have to do this. Now, I will say this: I feel like the player's handbook for 2024 definitely they don't even mention secondary stats. They mostly mention primary stats. Yeah, it's like barbarian, your primary stat strength. They don't mention constitution. I can see that as being a pitfall. Not necessarily for barbarians, because let's face it, I think anyone who, with a little bit of sense says, hey, Constitution is going to, give me more health, and if I'm going to go and hit things up close, I want more health. That just makes sense. But I think for other classes like Wizard, I can see some new players, like if they don't understand that Constitution is an important stat for them, because they think, oh, I'm a wizard, I'm not supposed to have a lot of health. But then they probably don't understand that, like, you're going to have to make concentration checks. You take damage while concentrating on a spell, then you're going to want your Constitution high so that you can pass those checks and keep concentrating on the spell. Otherwise, you lose concentration and you have to cast it again, and then you blow a spell slot. Yeah, and that's not fair to the new player if that's kind of like, because that's something that's easy to overlook, like especially for someone playing the game new and they want to make a wizard, which is perfectly valid. First time playing, make whatever you want. Don't let anyone tell you, oh, this class is too complex for a new player. But for a new player who they want to make a wizard, and they read this, and let's say they skip over it, so they do have a page where like, hey, here's our recommended standard array for each class, because even those are very malleable. So let's say they either see it or they see it and ignore it and don't realize that, hey, maybe I should have my constitution higher. Then that is going to be an easy way for them to be really disappointed in being a wizard when they're dying faster, when they can't concentrate on spells, and it's just not fun. And so it seems weird to me that they don't even mention secondary stats. But you know what classes do come out ahead? Any ones that use dexterity and wisdom, they can each have like 4, depending on what they want to do, which kind of just seems really weird to me. It's like you would think that if they wanted to, if they really wanted to open things up and say like, hey, let's see, I'm trying. Here we go. Yeah, so we have standard array by class. So if you don't want to put any thought into it and you just want to make a cookie cutter, you can just go there and say, hey, these are my stats. Add my points from my background here. Done. But it's one of those things where that can be a pitfall, I think. And so again, I think I'd rather just say, hey, have your pick your stats, pick your. I would even say the origin feat. I don't like the origin feats being tied to specific backgrounds, because I think there's arguments to be made for different backgrounds and different feats, and then it also doesn't make sense when you consider backwards compatibility. because they even say in that blurb I read at the beginning that the old backgrounds don't have feats. Just pick a feat and put your stats wherever. So I feel like in the spirit of like keeping things in older versions and things in the newer version better, just say, hey, pick your stats and put whatever background feat you want. And then I'd say like for the actual backgrounds themselves, going back to that. Hold on. Went back a little before. So even going back to that, I really think the only things that should be tied to backgrounds are your skill proficiencies, the tool proficiencies that they give, because they do update a lot of tool proficiencies in this one. You can do a lot more with the tools now. And then I'd say equipment. Just have the equipment tied to your background. Like, hey, if you're like, let's face it, if you're the farmer, you're probably going to have a sickle, carpenter's tools. You might have a healer kit, iron pot shovel, and traverse clothes, and then a handful of gold. But like that makes sense to have a farmer that has that kind of stuff on them. Uh, but in the end, it's whatever. Because again, I'm just going to ignore this. I'm just going to let my players pick their scores. I'm just going to let their players pick whatever feat they want, and that's going to be it. And then they get the tools. And honestly, I'm a big proponent of, instead of saying, "Hey, you have this equipment," I do like that they do this in here. Is instead of saying, "Hey, you get this equipment," I rather just say, "Hey, here's your starting set if you're going to go with this background." So again, for the farmer background, you can either take that equipment that I just listed and 30 gold. You start with 30 gold to go with the equipment, or you can just get 50 gold altogether. And I like the flat gold a lot more because it lets your players kind of choose what they think is important. I think the downside of this is you've got to make sure that your players know, hey, you need either a component pouch or a spellcasting focus if you're going to be one of these spellcasting classes. Because nothing's going to suck more than if you're a spellcasting class. It's like, well, you would be able to cast that spell, but you didn't buy a focus. Uh, yeah, so I'm a big proponent of the goal. Because then, it's like, okay, well, if they think, hey, rope is going to be useful, and one player gets rope, but maybe another player is thinking, like, you know what, a lantern will be useful, or caltrops, or ball bearings, or, a flask of oil, or any of these things, because especially in this 2024 handbook, they actually go into depth about what you can do with any number of things, like um like the jug, 2 copper pieces holds up to a gallon of water. Like that doesn't seem like a lot until you get to that situation where, oh, we need to contain some of this, I don't know, magic liquid from a fountain or whatever. Oh, look, I got a jug. So that's not a big one. Uh, but here's something like perfume. Like they had perfume in the old one. It's like, okay, well, what can you do with perfume? Like you can wear it. But they actually put mechanics to it, and they said perfume comes in a 4-ounce vial. For 1 hour after applying perfume to yourself, you have advantage on charisma persuasion checks made to influence an indifferent human within 5 feet of yourself. That makes sense, and that's cool that they took something as innocuous as perfume and gave it a purpose in the game. Like again, this is why there's so much good. Like, yes, I can nitpick about, oh, they didn't make the backwards compatibility for the cleric that obvious, but they gave us so much more. Same thing with the background. Like, okay, like the backgrounds, I'm just going to ignore that. But they also did so much cool stuff. Let's see here. What other things do they have here? Yeah, like some stuff is obvious. Like they have vials. Okay, we all know what a vial does. Spyglass. We all know what that does. And so yeah, it's just cool stuff like that. Like I'm glad that they actually gave every item in the game a purpose and said, "Hey, these are the mechanics. Like this is how big it is." It's like the ladder's 10 feet. It's a 10-foot ladder. That makes sense to especially if you ever just put ladder in the game. It's like, okay, well, how big is that? Are we talking a step ladder? Are we talking like a big 10-foot ladder? Am I going to be able to get across the Mexican border in this ladder because the wall is just kind of a joke? Uh, so yeah, it's like ball bearings always had a mechanic. Let's see here. Yeah, the bell. Like I don't think the bell ever had any text to it, at least not that I can remember. But here it says you can usually utilize action, and the bell produces a sound that can be heard 60 feet away. That's all good. I love it. I absolutely love it. Trying to think what else here. They improve so many things. Like if you go into the various classes, some of them feel like they got nerfed, but I think some of them also kind of needed to be nerfed. Like I think the big thing, and you probably heard people talk about this, is the fact that the cleric now has to concentrate on both spirit guardians and spiritual weapon, so they can't have both out at once. But that makes sense to me. Like that's honestly, it's a powerful combo. That's why people notice it. That's why people loved it, and that's just why it kind of needed to be nerfed. It's just a very powerful thing to have. So I can understand why they nerfed that 100%. The monk definitely got some love in this, and I love what they did with the monk. Pretty much, you don't have key points anymore. You have focus points. They are the same thing. They are basically the same thing, but you get more of them, and they come back on a short rest, and that's what the monk needed. They fixed the elemental monk a little bit, but it's one of those things where it's like one of the big problems with the monks is they didn't give you a lot of key points. If you built an elemental monk, uh, it was almost ridiculous how expensive some of those spells were. It's like, okay, well, I got 5 key points, and like half of my stuff is like 2 or 3 or 5 key points. So it's like, and you don't get them back until a long rest. So it's like being an elemental monk just sucked because you're going in there and it's like, well, I cast my 3 spells of the day. Time to go back to hitting everything with my fists up and down. Uh, so yeah, like they definitely got some love here. They come back on a short rest now, and that's what I love is I feel like the philosophy when it came to every subclass and every class in this book, it's they picked what they wanted the class or the subclass to do, and they said, how can we get this class or subclass to do that more? Berserker Barbarian completely fixed. If you went rules as written, the Berserker Barbarian used to be unplayable thanks to the exhaustion mechanic, which they actually changed the exhaustion mechanic in this game. It is now far less punishing, but you still have to watch it because it becomes one of the. You still die at 6 levels of exhaustion, but once you get to 5 levels of exhaustion, you're pretty much useless. But you also don't become like with the ult exhaustion. Like after like 1 or 2 levels, you became useless. With this, like 1 or 2 levels, I mean, you're still not great, but you can still function. You're just functioning less. But it becomes increasingly, problematic, and so it is something that you have to take into account. So that's good. I'm so happy they fixed the Berserker. I'd say if there's one thing I'm disappointed in is I feel like the Barbarian is missing a subclass because I mean they gave each class four updated subclasses and or new subclasses depending on which class you go into. I feel like there is a missing subclass with barbarians because barbarians get a lot of good subclasses, a lot of mention. Beast Barbarian, one of my favorite. The ability to just like grow claws and go at your enemy. That's cool. Zealot Barbarians, just you devote yourself to a god so wholeheartedly that they're insanely violent and force. That's a cool thing for a barbarian. But I think the first time I even heard the term barbarian, like ever, was in a game called Total Annihilation Kingdoms, and there was this unit that was and it was called a berserker, just like the barbarian subclass. And it was just this guy in a kilt. He had 2 big axes, and he would just run up super fast at an enemy and just start pounding on them. And that was really cool. Uh, but you look at barbarian subclasses. There's no barbarian subclass that dual wields, and that to me is like criminal because like I think to me like I think that's more quintessential than the barbarian with 1 big axe. I think barbarians like I want to see a guy that just like takes 2 weapons, jumps into a fray of enemies, and just starts swinging around wildly. Yeah, and you can see that in something like Star Wars. So many of the Sith, they dual wield lightsabers, and they just that can just like kick butt with two swords, and yeah, they're not barbarians, but it's still that very hyper violent, psychotic warrior type feel to it. Uh, so like, and I do feel they make dual wielding easier in this game because it's basically two feats you need. I think one is even an origin feat, if I recall, but I don't recall explicitly. Um, but the trick is, and here's where the trick is you can always you can dual wield regardless, as long as both weapons are light. There is one feat that allows you to make a second attack, uh, and you can use, and if I'm reading this right, 'cause some of the wording is a little weird. So if I'm understanding right, you can make a second attack with a weapon that is, I think it can't be a heavy one, that's for sure. It might be able to be versatile, but I'm not sure. But the first weapon you attack with has to be a light weapon, and the second attack can be anything, but you're still not adding a modifier. Then there's a second feat, and that second feat is what allows you to add your modifier to the second attack. So it's easier to dual wield with light weapons, which makes sense. But even if you dual wield, you do still need one of your weapons to be light, and one of your weapons, needs to be a one-handed weapon. Uh, and that's fine. That makes sense. Like it makes sense. Like if you're wielding two heavy axes, like that's gonna, or I mean, not with the heavy uh, description, but if you're wielding two axes, it's going to be heavy, and so that's going to be like a little slow and ponderous. But if you have a weapon, you can like slash real quick and then bring a hammer down on another enemy. So there's that. The last thing I want to talk about is actually in the lore, because for those of you who don't know, I love my orcs. I absolutely love orcs in just about every fashion. And they do make a lore change to orcs. It's not a bad one. Because before, in the old player's handbook, you could only play a half orc. Because canonically, orcs were chaotic evil. Because, in D&D, evil is like this actual physical thing that something can be, which is problematic when you're kind of talking about intelligent races. It's the Tolkien dilemma. It's like, okay, are orcs evil by nature? No. So then you're basically slaughtering sentient people, and it becomes a problem, especially if you're trying to tell a story that's beyond just like good side, bad side. And I think those are the more interesting ones. But here, let's just read the orc description. Orcs trace their creation to Grumsh, a powerful god who roamed the wide open spaces of the material plane. Grumsh equipped his children with gifts to help them wander great plains, vast caverns, and churning seas, and to face monsters that lurk there. Even when they turn their devotion to other gods, orcs retain Grumsh's gifts, endurance and determination, the ability to see in darkness. Orcs are on average tall and broad, they have gray skin, ears that are sharply pointed, and the prominent lower canines that resemble small tusks. Orc youths on some worlds are told about their ancestors' great travels and travails. Inspired by those tales, many orcs wonder when Grumsh will call on them to match the heroic deeds told, and if they will prove worthy of his fable. Other orcs are happy to leave old tales in the past and to find their own way. So this I have thoughts on. It's not bad, because let's face it, orcs are typically bad things that the players are allowed to kill. And, I can pull up the monster manual and, full orcs are there. You can play a half orc in Player's Handbook. And they later, in fairness, added full orcs. But it was still kind of a weird dynamic. Because, you have, and like, again, here in the Player's Handbook, for those who don't know, there are no half races. You can still play half races by, using the backwards compatibility rules. So it's not like half races don't exist. But at the same time, I'm not sure how much I like this. Because, yes, on the one hand, it's good that they give orcs a sort of good to neutral, racial motivation. It's not that orcs are evil. It's that they're, determined, and, it kind of makes them sound like explorers, which is kind of a cool niche when you think about it. But at the same time, I'm also a sucker for the stories of, like, the characters that come from like evil societies or evil backgrounds or even just like toxic places, and then they find a way to exist in the world and kind of unlearn the bad things of the past. And it also it seems kind of weird to me because for me, I think so much of my love of D&D orcs comes from their creation story, and that is as Grumsh goes to all the pantheons are picking places for their respective races to live. And the elves are like, oh, we'll take the woods, and the dwarves get the mountains. But then Grumsh comes, and like all those slots are taken, and Coralon, like okay, like hands on the table, like Coralon. I always kind of laugh at Coralon being a good god because when you hear this story, it kind of makes you scratch your head. Uh, but then Coralon goes, oh no, there's no places for orcs in the world. And of course, Grumsh, being the god of orcs, probably has the temperament of a very angry boar. And he stabs his spear into the earth and says, "No, the orcs will live here." And so that's why orcs live in caves, and he vows revenge against Coralon. And like when you look at that story, Coralon's kind of a dick. Like honestly, it astounds me. Like like if you were to like just get isekai'd into the D&D world, and like you had no context for D&D, and you heard the story, Coralon's kind of the bad guy. He's just kind of like this racist guy that's like, oh no, orcs don't get to live anywhere. It's like, okay, screw you too, Coralon. Um, so I kind of wish they had folded that into here. Like I feel like I'm okay. So this is like if I were the writer for Wizards of the Coast and I got to decide the lore. I feel like what I would do is make it to where, and it's tough because this is also kind of like the niche that Goliaths have. Like Goliaths, if you look at their lore, they're big on fair play. So maybe this wouldn't necessarily be the best move, but I think it's still the move that I think would be the best move. Is that orcs just one, they're passionate. That's the thing. It's like their anger is like a wildfire. Their happiness is like this raucous laughter of joy. They feel their emotions deeply. Uh, and the result is that they have this really strong sense of justice, but also the recognition that they kind of suffered that cosmic injustice from Coralon. Uh, and so like that's why like you do have these groups of orcs who are just like these revenge driven people. Like they're the ones that hate elves. They're the ones that want to kill every single elf. And they're the ones that you would fight. But then also have these other orcs where it's like they've kind of grown past that. They're like, it's silly to have this racial enmity, or I guess special enmity, because they go from same race to same species, which I understand 100% why. I'm all on board with that. Uh, but I think it's one of those things where I feel there could be more stories told from orcs that either have to that either don't have the grace to fit into society. Because I mean, let's face it, people do evil campaigns all the time. Barbarian orc, evil barbarian orc, like that writes itself. Um, but I think there's also to be said something about the story about these other orcs that put that aside, try and live in society, maybe don't necessarily have a place there because of the prejudices of other races that, let's face it, have been fighting orcs for a long time. And so they become these like nomadic explorers, and it's all about finding the place where they feel they can belong. And I think that's a story that would resonate with a lot of people is letting go of your past anger, letting go of like the bad things that you were taught, and finding a way to find a place in your world where you can be your most honest self and be the best version of yourself. And I think that could easily be an orc story. But then again, I think the other thing they're trying to do with this is make it to where the descriptions are just general enough to where any DM can, make their own lore and just kind of use this as a template. It's like, okay, well, what purpose does orcs serve? Well, we know orcs being like the violent warriors, like ever since Tolkien, wrote his books. So we already have that in the cultural memory. But I think this maybe like a good template of the idea of like what orcs can be. It's not my favorite, but I think it's still a very good one. And I'd be interested to see what people do with that when they kind of follow this more. Because the other odd thing is that if you do this, obviously this kind of leaves out the whole Corellon Grumsh conflict, which is weird because when you go to the elf portion, they talk about the Corellon Loth conflict, which is related to the Grumsh conflict. Um, and so it's like it's weird because it kind of almost makes Grumsh seem like a good guy, but like let's face it, even with that story, Grumsh is not a good guy. Like he's sworn to revenge. So it makes me wonder if like maybe they're gonna write a book where like maybe the orcs and the elves come to like or like the orc and elf pantheons like come to a sort of ceasefire or like an understanding of like okay we can't fight each other or our races or our species are going to go extinct. Let's let's maybe like cool it down a little bit, or maybe before Grumsh went off the deep end, like before he was basically gaslit by Corellon, he actually was like this kind of hero god, and he wasn't the prettiest because he was an orc. Which is weird because, like, again, the lore between Corellon and Grumsh is so weird. Like there's this kind of lore that goes like it hypothesizes that Grumsh and Corellon were actually brothers, and that their parent deities basically gave Corellon grace and good looks, but they give like Grumsh like this hard will and determination. But of course, it made him ugly because he just became like this hardened person. So I don't know. It's kind of weird, and I'd be interested to see honestly what DMs come up with. Like I love watching, YouTube D&D playthroughs, like people that make their own campaigns and just put them on there. I watch Dungeons and Dragon Time. I watch Roll with Me. I TFS at the table is pretty much what got me into D&D because god dang, that is such a great series. There's no such thing as vampires. Uh, but yeah, the other cool thing is the fact that they added Goliath as a core race in the player handbook, which is good because if you go to the original player's handbook, so many races there when it came to like the stats because that was just the norm at the time. Like so many of them were like bonus, like elves, bonus intelligence, half elves, bonus charisma, dragonborn, bonus charisma, tieflings, bonus charisma. So many of them had bonus charisma, and then like elves got strength and constitution. Humans kind of just got whatever you put their stats into. Other races kind of got like dexterity, but to me, there was like a distinct lack of like other muscly races. Like the dwarves were more of like the constitution focused race where it's like, okay, I want to be this big tough thing that takes damage. Whereas the half orcs were like, I'm the big tough thing that wants to deal damage. And I feel like Goliaths are a good addition to where like if you want to play something strong and burly that's not an orc, you play a Goliath. And then let's face it, it's perfect because like I have a player that basically says he wants to play something like Rog from Vox Machina and in Critical Role. So that's perfect for him. It's right here. I do like that they kind of go into the lore and kind of make it seem like they kind of do to Goliath what they do with Dragonborn, where it's you basically pick an ancestry. So it's like fire giants, frost giant, hill giant, stone giant, storm giant, and cloud giant, and you pick one of those. And like even if you look at the picture, like I love this picture because it kind of shows. Oh, here, hold on, kind of new to the webcam, really. Yeah, and so it kind of shows that like Goliaths aren't this kind of samey looking race where they're all just pale white. Yeah, it's like no, like they look like kind of miniature versions of giants, and like they have that ancestry, and they get different boons depending on what their ancestry is. That's cool. Um, the other thing I like lore wise is it's a very simple thing. Asimar. Apparently, you're supposed to pronounce it Asimar. I've always pronounced it Asimar. I guess that made an Asimar out of me. Um, are mortals who carry a spark of the upper planes within their souls. Whether descended from an angelic being or infused with celestial power, they can fan that spark that light. Asimar can arise among any population of mortals. It always confounded me that Asimar, prior to this, pretty much all portrayed as human looking. And it's okay, like don't get me wrong, I would have always loved to make my Asimar orc because I love my orcs. But it's like you're telling me that in a continuity that has multiple species, you're telling me that Asimar have only like basically made human forms. You're telling me an angel never got busy with an elf and made angel Asimar, or like with a dwarf or a halfling. Like none of that. Like angels, I can basically assume any form they want. Like they pretty, it seems silly to me. It seems so silly to me. So I like the fact that you can choose and you can even choose medium or small. So you know what? You want to play a halfling Asimar? You can be a halfling Asimar. Just take the Asimar and say, yeah, I'm small because I'm a halfling Asimar. I can make my orc Asimar. I'm so happy about that. The other thing I kind of wanted to get into, and this goes back to items, I know we kind of talked about items before, is weapons now get mastery properties. If you are in martial class, you will get X amount of masteries. And so you will basically say, like, I want to have a mastery with the light hammer, which has the Nick mastery. And so if you go to Nick, it says, when you make an extra attack of the light property, you can make it as part of the attack action instead of as a bonus action. You can make this extra attack only once per turn. So basically, if you create a martial character and you get a mastery, you can use that ability. And this is great because I think one of the biggest things with the champion subclass, and it's still a little bit of a problem here, but not nearly as pronounced because of this. Uh, it's one of those things where it's like you can now use your weapon mastery, and they're kind of like spells for marshals. I'm big on the dungeon dudes, like maneuvers for marshals. This is basically that. It's you choose your masteries. Some classes can reset them on a long rest. So if you want to, master a battle axe the next day because maybe you found a good battle axe, but you don't have a mastery with that one, but you're proficient in it. So you can say, okay, long rest. I don't care about my spear anymore. Go ahead, give me that mastery with the battle axe instead. Boom. Uh, there you go. So I think this is a good start. I think it does help the champion subclass a lot because the champion definitely felt like the baseline fighter, and it's still very much that. Like they don't really get much, but this at least gives them some cool toys to play with. And in the Battle Master, they get maneuvers and they get masteries now. So they're still gonna. It's pretty much a matter of it's like, do you want to be I don't want to say like a spellcaster because that's not right at all. They're not casting spells, but it's basically like it gives you fighting options other than hit the thing. And now the champion has a little bit of that, not as much as the battle master, but the champion is basically your crit fisher. It's going to be, hey, I want to hit with my weapon. I want to crit more often. I want to deal extra damage with my crits. And so if you want to do that, you go champion. If you want to be like, okay, no, I kind of want to control the battlefield by like pushing my enemy down or, tripping them or disarming them with any number of maneuvers or, doing a reaction riposte with my maneuver when they attack me. You can do that as a battle master. Yeah, so there's that. Let's just kind of go through some of the subclasses real quick. We're not going to go too in depth. I'll just kind of go over the ones that are there. So Barbarian, again, a lot of the baseline Barbarian is the same. You still have your unarmored defense. You still have your rage. Rage can now be extended as a bonus action. So it's not going to be one of those things where, oh, I have to waste my time running up to this enemy. I'm not going to be able to reach them, and I'm going to lose my rage, and I'm going to have to rage again. They come back on a short rest now, which is good. Because again, like I said, a lot of these things are, they want you to do what your class does, and they want you to be able to do it more. You never want someone to like play a class and be like, well, I'm a barbarian, but I only have so many rages, and I've already used so many. I want to save that rage for when I really need. No, like you want your barbarian to go into rage like almost every combat. Like, you probably won't need to do it every combat, depending on how the campaign shakes out and what kind of campaign you're doing. But you never want to have a barbarian that's afraid of raging because they might lose it. Um, Berserker fixed. Path of the Wild Heart is pretty much the Path of the Totem Barbarian. That's basically the same. It's, you pick your animals, and you get your benefit based on what animals you pick. Path of the Royal Tree is a new one. It kind of feels like the Feywild version of the Barbarian, which is fine. But it's different. You have a little battlefield control. You can pull people to you, which is cool. Path of the Zealots in here, that's basically unchanged. Bards have a new subclass. They have the class of College of Dance. It kind of plays a little bit like a monk. You get unarmored defense, but you add your charisma instead of your dexterity. It's basically like a monk with charisma. Um, College of Glamour is here. That's always a solid one. Then you have College of Valor, College of Lore. And it's interesting because you look at those, it's kind of like, okay, well, what they definitely tried to go with diversity in this, because it's one of those things where it's like, especially when you have a classic of bard that can be a lot of different things to a lot of different players and a lot of different campaigns. It's like you didn't want to have 4 bard classes in here and they all kind of do more or less the same thing. You don't want that. Like the barbarian is all going to be about smashing, but even those do something different. It's going to be how you smash. Clerics are different now. Every class gets their subclass at level 3 now. I am perfectly okay with this. I know a lot of people complain about it, but the truth is, it always kind of sucks if you start a campaign and your cleric already has their super special cool stuff that makes them unique as a cleric, and meanwhile you're a fighter and your options are hit thing, second wind, action surge, and that's it until level 3. And let's face it, levels 1 and 2 are kind of like tutorial mode for D&D anyway. It's like so many campaigns start at level 3, so it just makes sense that have people start at level 3. It just makes sense. But for the cleric, they have the life domain if you want to do a healer. The light domain is kind of the blaster domain. Trickery is kind of the control domain. And then you have war, which is the beat 'em up domain. Like, clerics are still versatile. But again, like, you don't want to have like 3 cleric classes that are all kind of blastery in there. Or like if they added the Twilight cleric in there, it totally would have dwarfed the war cleric. You don't want to do that. Druid. They made some changes to Druid. This is one that I kind of brushed over briefly. But I think the biggest thing is that with the Circle of the Land, you can now change what land you are at the end of a long rest. Again, that's cool because, it sucks like if you decide to pick a land, and then you find out like most of the campaign's on the water, and you're like a druid of the desert or something, and it just kind of doesn't match up. But now if you start going on the water, like okay, well I'm going to switch to druid of the or over in the frozen north. Okay, well I'll do druid of I think it's what the frozen, the Arctic. Yeah, polar. There we go. So it's like I can be a polar druid. Um, the ocean one is basically kind of like a storm druid. It feels kind of blasterish, but it's still very cool. Moon druids are classic. Like you'll never get rid of a druid. Like the ability, there's always going to be the druid subclass of I want to turn into something and maul it like an animal. Then you have the Circle of the Stars, which is also an older one that's getting a revamp. It's still a little blastery, but I will say Yeah, well, actually, I'd say like the C1 is kind of more control, but it's still very spellcasty. Like again, like Druid's like having a spellcasting Druid, you're gonna have control and you're gonna have blasting anyway. It's just that the Star Druid's slightly better at blasting and the C Druid's slightly better at control. Fighter subclasses, uh, pretty much the same as the player's handbook. Battlemaster, you get Maneuvers. Champion, you get better crit range. Eldritch Knight, you get spells. And then they added the Psy Warrior. I believe that was Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. They added that one. The Monk, much improved. They definitely revamped the. You get the Warrior Mercy because it's no longer Way of, it's Warrior of. So your Warrior Mercy, Warrior Shadow, Warrior of Elements. It's the new Element Monk. It's much better. Again, mostly the key points. The key make the new focus points, the key points, and the way they work so much better than the old version. We have the open hand. Um, Paladin basically has the same three as the player's handbook. Devotion is you want to protect. Then you have Oath of Glory. You have the Oath of Vengeance if you want to be DPS, and then you have the Oath. Did they change the name of it? No, it's still Oath of the Ancients. Oath of the Ancients is kind of like it's a little more spellcast, but again, let's face it, you're a paladin. You're going to be doing a little bit of everything, a little bit of spellcasting, and a little bit of smiting. They still find smiting got nerfed. Like I'm sorry, just it got nerfed, and that's fine because the amount of smiting and the burst damage on that was insane. I'm sorry. I am sorry, paladins out there. That needed to be nerfed. You needed to be nerfed. Play a monk now. It'll be just as fun. Ranger, so I think the Ranger kind of broke even. It's never been the best the best class, but they still help it. I think overall the Ranger kind of, I don't think they necessarily came out ahead compared to some subclasses, but I don't think Rangers needed it too much. Like, they needed it, and they made improvements with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and they basically kind of took that and put it here. They did change some stuff, but now you have the Beastmaster if you want to be the Pet Ranger. You have the Fey Wanderer, which is kind of like your DPS Ranger, Gloomstalker, and Hunter. And like everyone loves Gloomstalker. And again, like some things got nerfed, some things got fixed. I think it's just now it's just kind of easier to play. You don't have to worry about like, okay, well, I have to use the Tasha's rules, and if I use that feature in Tasha's, I have to use this feature in Tasha's because I can't use the old feature because the old feature is incompatible with that feature. It just makes it easier. Like, I'm sorry, it just makes it easier. And honestly, sometimes you just need to make things easier to play. Sometimes I think, especially when it comes to making games, we get so caught up in having like all the moving parts that come together, and like that's nice, but if there's too many moving parts, it kind of bogs it down a bit. Rogue, Arcane Trister explains itself. You kind of have like the control of the spells and stuff. Assassin, Soul Knife. I love the Soul Knife. Like, to me, like I think that's like one of the coolest rogue subclasses. And then you have Thief. Um, my understanding, again, some of you have skipped up because like I don't have a big interest in rogues. But my understanding is like they kind of made it easier to use like sneak attack and get advantage on your opponent, which was always kind of the big problem because sometimes as a DM you're like, I need to give my players a challenge, so I'm gonna do this to give them disadvantage so they have to fight a little harder. But then the next, then you go and play a rogue, and it's like, okay, well, I can't get an advantage for my sneak attack. You know, Sorcerer. Well, once again, people are complaining that the Sorcerer doesn't get their subclass to level 3, and that makes no sense because the whole point of a Sorcerer is it comes from your lineage. And it's like, okay, okay, well, I know maybe I'm going to table that for now, but Sorcerer, you basically have Aberrant Mind, you have Clockwork, Draconic, and Wild Magic. Again, they all have their niches. Um, Warlocks, again, get their stuff last at level 3. I'll probably do like one more little thing at the end for that. Uh, so here they diversify a lot. So you have Celestial, you have Fiend, you have Great Old One, and I think it's Fae. Great Old One, Fiend. Celestial. Oh yeah, there we go. Archfey. I skipped over Archfey for a sec. Um, Wizard, definitely not as many subclasses in the new rules, but again, the old ones are backwards compatible, so it's not a big deal. Uh, you get your subclass at level 3 now. So here you have Abjurer, Diviner, Evoker, and Illusionist, and again, they kind of like all have their little niche to fill, and that's fine. That's how it should be. Um, so I think my one final thought is like the people that complain about the Cleric, the Warlock, and the Sorcerer not getting their subclasses to level 3. Because the big thing is like, okay, well, how do you not know your lineage? You know, when you're a sorcerer at level 1, like how do you not know your patron at level 1? How do you not know your god at level 1? And my answer to this is going to be simple. It's going to be talk to your DM. Like that's it. Talk to your DM. Oh, sorry. I guess I accidentally activated my phone. But yeah, so it's like you're going to want to talk to your DM and say like, hey, I have, I want to make a sorcerer. Am I going to know my lineage at level 1? Do you want me to know my lineage at level 1? Like, how do you want to approach this? Because here's the thing. I think most people who play a warlock, who play a sorcerer, or who play a cleric, a lot of them know that answer when they make it. Like, a lot of players go to play a game and they know what subclass they want. Because, again, most games start at level 3. So many people don't start at level 1 because level 1 is just, my little first D&D campaign for a lot of people. And that's fine. Like there's nothing wrong with starting at level 1. But I think a lot of people who make their character say, hey, this subclass looks really cool, I want to play it. Which means that if you're a warlock and you're playing at level 1, even if you don't have the little wingdings of your subclass, you know you're going to want the Great Old One Patron. You know you're going to want the Fiend. If you're a cleric, you know you want to worship Drumsh or worship Corlon or Lathander or whatever gods are in the game. You're going to know what domain you have. And again, like talk to your DM because maybe the gods and the fiends in their setting work differently. You're not going to want to assume that they go by the strict D&D pantheons. Same thing with sorcerers. Like, okay, sorcerers, it's kind of a little easier because it's just like you don't have to have your dad or your mom be a dragon to be a draconic sorcerer. But, you just have to establish, like, yeah, somewhere along the line, a dragon was part of your ancestry. And that's fine. And that is completely fine. But talk to your DM, because, maybe having a draconic ancestor means something different in their campaign. Maybe having a fiendish ancestor has a lot of connotations in their campaign. It all depends. So regardless of whether you're going by the old method of level 1 or by the new method of level 3, you're still going to want to talk to your DM. Because what happens when you talk to your god? Who has to play your god? The DM. Who has to play your warlock patron? The DM. Who might have to play your ancestor? Like if you're looking for your dragon ancestor that can live for like thousands of years, the DM has to play that dragon. And the DM is going to want to know, what is your relationship with your patron? What is your relationship with your god? And then that's all there is to it. So yeah, stop complaining about it being level 3. It just makes sense mechanically. We just have to work with it. Like that's all there is to it. So yeah, closing out, I think that's most of my notions or opinions about the 2024 Player's Handbook. I personally think it's great. I definitely I'm going to be making a campaign for some of my players, uh, and we're going to kind of try and stick to the Player's Handbook just to kind of have a fresh start because so many of them are new. We have like some semi-experienced players, but we also have 2 players that have like barely played. So this will be good for them, especially the one that wants to play Grog, because he's now going to get to choose like the lineage of his giant. So yeah, I don't want him to go in like I don't think he's literally going to play Grog, but at the same time that'll give him an interesting option. It's like, okay, what giant lineage am I from? So yeah, so that's all. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here. Hope you have a good one. And I saw something on a bumper sticker I like. I'm going to start saying other interviews. Do more of what makes you awesome. So go ahead, have a good night, and do more of what makes you awesome. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.